For nearly 3 decades, a shadow has stretched over one of America's most infamous and tragic cold cases. A shadow that concealed one of the only other people in the house on that fateful Christmas night in 1996. While the world spun theories and the media cast its relentless glare, he stayed silent, a ghost in his own family's tragedy. He was just 9 years old, supposedly sleeping in his room, when his 6-year-old sister, JonBenet, was taken from hers and brutally murdered. For 20 years, he didn't say a public word. He grew up, went to college, and tried to build a life far from the chaotic nightmare that had consumed his family. Then, he decided to talk. The boy who was there, the brother who lost his sister, the person who has lived under a cloud of suspicion for most of his life, JonBenet Ramsey, finally decided to tell his story. This is the story of what he remembers, what he denies, and what it was really like to be the other Ramsey child. In a landmark interview, he was asked the one question that has been on everyone's mind for decades: "Did you do it?" His response was direct. "You won't find any evidence because that's not what happened." But to really understand his words, you have to go back to the night that changed everything. A night that began with the chilling discovery of a bizarre note on a staircase and ended with a little girl's body in a cold, dark basement. This is a story of lingering questions, a family's determined defense, and a brother's perspective on a case that, even after 28 years, refuses to grasp the weight of JonBenet Ramsey's silence, and the gravity of his eventual decision to speak. We have to go back to that frigid December morning in Boulder, Colorado. It was December 26, 1996. The Ramsey household, a large Tudor home on 15th Street, should have been filled with the happy, quiet aftermath of Christmas. John and Patsy Ramsey, a wealthy and well-known couple, had come home late the night before from a Christmas party. Their 2 children, 9-year-old Burke and 6-year-old JonBenet, were supposed to be sleeping soundly, dreaming of their upcoming family trip, but that morning peace was shattered before dawn. At 5:52 a.m., a frantic Patsy Ramsey called 911. The recording of that call would become one of the most dissected pieces of audio in true crime history. Patsy's panicked voice told the dispatcher her daughter was gone. She'd found a ransom note. Police arrived in just 3 minutes, stepping into a scene that was already spinning out of control. Instead of immediately securing the house as a crime scene, the first response was a mess. The Ramseys had called friends and family, who started showing up, walking through the house and contaminating potential evidence. The focus was on a kidnapping, an idea backed up by a bizarre, 2.5-page ransom note Patsy said she found on the kitchen staircase. The note itself is a puzzle that has never been solved. It was unusually long and rambling. Written on a notepad from inside the Ramsey house with a pen also from the home. The author claimed to be from a small foreign faction that respected John's business but not his country. It demanded a very specific, and odd, amount of money, $118,000. John Ramsey later pointed out that this was almost the exact amount of a recent work bonus he'd received, a detail suggesting the writer had inside knowledge of the family's finances. The note was filled with threats, warning that if police were called, JonBenet would be beheaded. It ended with the sign-off, SBTC, an acronym that remains a mystery. For hours, the house was treated as the site of a kidnapping. Police, friends, and John Ramsey looked for any sign of a break-in, but they couldn't find one. A basement window was broken, but an undisturbed spiderweb in the corner suggested it hadn't been used. With no call from the supposed kidnappers, the mood in the house grew heavier. Finally, that afternoon, a detective named Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey and a family friend, Fleet White, to do another, more thorough search of the house. That's when the case took its darkest turn. John went straight to the basement. There, in a small, windowless room, the wine cellar, he made a horrific discovery. His 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet, was there. She wasn't missing, she'd been in the house the whole time. Her small body was wrapped in her favorite white blanket. She had duct tape over her mouth, and a cord was tied around her wrists. Around her neck was a garrote, made from a nylon cord and the broken handle of one of Patsy's paintbrushes. In a move that would be criticized for years, a grief-stricken John Ramsey picked up his daughter's body, further disrupting the crime scene, and carried her upstairs. The kidnapping theory evaporated. This was now a murder investigation, and the prime suspects were the only 3 people known to have been in the house: John, Patsy, and their 9-year-old son, Burke. The autopsy later revealed the brutal details. JonBenet's official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. She had suffered a massive 8.5-inch fracture to her skull. There were also signs of what was described as sexual assault. In her stomach, the coroner found undigested pineapple. This small detail would become a huge point of contention for years, especially after a bowl of pineapple with Burke and Patsy's fingerprints was found in the kitchen. The aftermath was chaos. The media swarmed Boulder, and the story of the slain child beauty queen became a global obsession. Photos of JonBenet in full pageant makeup and sophisticated outfits were shown around the world, fueling a narrative that was often more sensational than factual. The Boulder Police Department, not used to such a high-profile case, made what many would later admit were critical mistakes. The crime scene wasn't properly secured. The parents weren't formally interviewed separately for days. And a deep divide formed between the police, who mostly suspected the parents, and the district attorney's office, which leaned toward an intruder theory. In the middle of this storm of suspicion and media frenzy, one person remained almost completely invisible: Burke Ramsey. He was interviewed by investigators, but the public heard nothing from him. As theories swirled, many started to wonder, what did the boy in the other room really know? For 20 years, the world would have to wait to find out. For 2 decades, Burke Ramsey was more of a ghost than a person. He was a name, a face in old family photos, a silent figure at the center of an American true crime obsession. While his parents, John and Patsy, fought back against public suspicion with TV interviews and a book about their innocence, Burke was deliberately kept out of the spotlight. His parents went to incredible lengths to give him a private life, far away from the cameras. In a 2016 interview, he explained why he stayed quiet for so long. "For the last 20 years, I wanted to grow up like a normal kid," he said. He knew that speaking out would only rouse it all up again. But growing up a Ramsey was anything but normal. The family moved to Atlanta shortly after the murder to escape the constant scrutiny in Boulder, but the shadow of the case followed them. Burke described the media attention as a chaotic nightmare that made him a deeply private person. Every anniversary, every so-called break in the case, every tabloid cover brought the trauma of that December morning rushing back. He was the boy whose sister was murdered, and to some, he was the boy who did it. This suspicion wasn't just gossip. It was fueled by leaks, books from former investigators, and TV specials. The "Burke did it" theory became one of the most prominent narratives. It was a story pieced together from circumstantial details and amateur psychology. People who promoted this theory pointed to that bowl of pineapple in the kitchen. They suggested a late-night fight, where JonBenet took a piece of pineapple from Burke's bowl. In this version of events, a flash of childhood anger led Burke to hit his sister with a heavy object, like the flashlight found in the house, accidentally killing her. The theory concluded that John and Patsy then staged the elaborate kidnapping and wrote the ransom note to cover for their son. This theory was also bolstered by reports of Burke's supposed behavioral issues. A former housekeeper had once claimed that Burke had a history of anger and had hit JonBenet with a golf club, leaving a small scar. These stories, combined with armchair analysis of his behavior in childhood police interviews, were woven into a powerful, though unproven, story. For 20 years, Burke lived with these accusations hanging over him, but he never responded. He went to Purdue University, studied computer science, and tried to build a life for himself. He chose to work remotely, which helped him maintain his privacy and avoid the stares and questions. The world only knew him through old home videos and the dark theories spun about him. His silence finally broke in 2016, on the 20th anniversary of his sister's death. At 29 years old, he sat down for a multi-part interview on The Dr. Phil Show. It was a calculated move. He said he wanted to honor his sister's memory and make sure she wasn't forgotten. It was also his chance, after 2 decades, to face the rumors himself. He knew exactly what people were saying. "I know people think I did it, that my parents did it. I know that we were suspects," he told Dr. Phil. This interview was his attempt to replace the media's caricature with the real man he'd become, and to finally give his side of the story. When Burke Ramsey finally sat down with Dr. Phil in 2016, it felt like the whole world was watching. This wasn't the 9-year-old boy from those grainy interrogation tapes. This was a 29-year-old man, ready to speak. The interview systematically broke down the case, not from the view of a cop or a theorist, but from the only other person who was in the house. Burke's testimony gave a first-hand account of that morning and directly confronted the rumors that had followed him for 20 years. First, he shared his memories of that morning. Burke insisted he was asleep when his mother realized JonBenet was gone. He said the first thing he knew was his mom bursting into his room. "I remember my mom searching my room that night saying, 'Where's my baby? Where's my baby?'" he recalled. He described her as frantic, panicking. He said she woke him up, but he stayed in bed. That detail, that he didn't get up while his family was in a panic, had always been a major point of suspicion. Critics couldn't understand why a 9-year-old boy wouldn't get out of bed to see what was wrong. Dr. Phil pressed him on it. Burke's explanation was simple. "I guess I kind of like to avoid conflict," he said. "I guess I just felt safer there." He claimed he was scared and didn't go downstairs until much later. "The next time I talked to somebody," he explained, "she's dead." Then, the interview tackled the most explosive theory head-on. Dr. Phil asked him directly if he'd gotten angry over pineapple and hit his sister. Burke's answer was firm, absolutely not. He admitted he remembered being downstairs that night playing with a new toy, but denied any fight with his sister. When Dr. Phil laid out the full theory, that he killed JonBenet and his parents covered it up, Burke didn't seem angry. He seemed almost detached, watching the theory as if it were a puzzle to be taken apart logically, not something to get emotional about. But he also addressed the rumors about his supposed aggression, like the story about him hitting JonBenet with a golf club. He admitted it happened but described it as a normal sibling accident, not a malicious attack. He painted a picture of a typical brother-sister relationship, a far cry from the violent dynamic imagined by so many. One of the most compelling moments came when Burke watched clips of his own childhood interrogation tapes, some of which had never been aired before. He watched himself as a 9-year-old boy, trying to answer investigators' questions. He watched himself draw a picture of his family, leaving JonBenet out because, as he explained, she was gone. He remembered the funeral, describing the sight of his sister in the casket as weird and traumatizing. The casket was small. Her eyes were closed, he recalled. "I think one of her eyes was a little bit droopy or something, but I thought that was weird." He said that at 9, he didn't really understand he would never see her again. Throughout the interview, Burke's demeanor was a hot topic. He often smiled or laughed nervously, even when talking about the most traumatic parts of his story. For many watching, it seemed strange and inappropriate, and it just fueled more suspicion. But for others, including some experts, it looked like a possible coping mechanism for a man who had lived through an incredible trauma and was now reliving it on national television. When Dr. Phil asked who he thought killed his sister, Burke's answer was firm and matched what his family had said all along: it was an intruder. He speculated that it was likely a pedophile who saw her at one of the pageants. By the end, Burke Ramsey had finally told his story. He denied everything, stating plainly, you won't find any evidence because that's not what happened. His testimony didn't solve the case, but it added a powerful, deeply personal perspective that had been missing for 2 decades. It forced everyone to see him not just as a character in a murder mystery, but as a brother still mourning his sister. Burke Ramsey's account is a powerful piece of this endless puzzle. After hearing his side of the story, what do you think of his testimony? Does it change how you see the case? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. And if this story has you thinking, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell for more deep dives into complex cases like this one. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. Burke Ramsey's testimony finally provided a narrative the public had only been able to guess at for 20 years. But a personal story, especially one told 2 decades later, has to be weighed against the actual evidence. While his words humanized him and backed his family's claims of innocence, they exist in a complicated world of forensics, legal fights, and changing police theories. The single most important piece of evidence supporting the intruder theory, and the innocence of the Ramseys, is DNA. In 2008, using more advanced, touch DNA analysis, the Boulder District Attorney's Office found an unknown male's DNA on 3 separate spots on JonBenet's clothing. The DNA of John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey was excluded. This was huge. On July 9, 2008, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey wrote a formal letter to John Ramsey, officially exonerating the family. She wrote, "To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry." She stated that the new DNA evidence had vindicated the family. This official clearance was a massive victory for the Ramseys, giving them scientific backing for the intruder story they'd told all along, but even that didn't stop the speculation. The same year Burke gave his Dr. Phil interview, CBS aired a documentary series called The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. A team of experts re-examined the evidence and concluded with the theory that Burke had accidentally killed his sister and his parents covered it up. The program even used a child actor to reenact the hypothetical scenario of Burke hitting his sister with a flashlight. The backlash was swift. Burke Ramsey filed a massive $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS. The intense legal battle ended in January 2019, when both sides reached a confidential, out-of-court settlement. While the terms weren't public, the case was dismissed, and Burke's lawyers stated he hoped the family would no longer suffer the pain of false accusations in the future. This legal win, though private, served as another form of vindication. Still, the case remains officially unsolved. Part of the reason for the lingering doubt comes from the acknowledged mistakes made during the initial investigation. In late 2024, nearly 28 years after the murder, Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfern publicly admitted that there were a number of things police could have done better back in 1996. This admission confirmed years of criticism about the unsecured crime scene and the delay in interviewing the parents. These early blunders created a void that was quickly filled by suspicion and conspiracy theories that have been hard to shake, even with exonerating evidence, but the investigation isn't dead. As of late 2024 and early 2025, there's a renewed sense of hope, mostly because of advances in forensic science. The Boulder Police Department is now actively working with the Colorado Cold Case Review Team and the FBI. They have digitized over 1 million pages of case files and are exploring the use of modern genetic genealogy, the same technology used to catch the Golden State Killer, to finally put a name to the unknown male DNA profile found at the scene. Chief Redfern has assured the public and the Ramsey family they are committed to solving the case. Burke Ramsey's testimony didn't offer a smoking gun. What it did was provide a crucial piece of the human story. It forced the public to look past the theories and see the boy who grew up in the shadow of one of America's greatest tragedies. His words, backed by the DNA evidence and his successful lawsuit against CBS, build a strong case for his innocence. While public opinion remains divided, his testimony stands as a powerful counternarrative to the decades of suspicion he endured. after 28 years, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey remains an open wound in the American psyche. It's a case defined by its haunting questions, its tragic young victim, and the cloud of suspicion that fell on her family. For 2 of those decades, the voice of her brother, Burke Ramsey, was completely missing from the story. His decision to finally break his silence in 2016 was a huge moment in the history of the case that he came forward not with a solution, but with his story. His testimony gave us a window into a life lived under an almost unimaginable weight. He described the chaotic nightmare of the media, the pain of being defined by the worst day of his life, and his unwavering belief that an intruder killed his sister. His account, while not new physical evidence, powerfully backed up his family's claims of innocence. Claims already supported by the 2008 DNA exoneration and legally bolstered by his settlement with CBS. Today, the investigation continues. Now in the hands of a new generation of law enforcement, the focus is on the promise of advanced DNA technology. The Boulder Police Department has renewed its commitment to finding the killer, working with state and federal experts to finally identify the source of that unknown male DNA. John Ramsey, now in his 80s, continues to fight for justice for his daughter, hopeful that these new technologies will finally bring an answer. Burke Ramsey has since stepped back from the public eye. He gave his account, faced the questions he had dodged for a lifetime, and returned to the private life he fought so hard to create. His testimony didn't solve his sister's murder. But it did accomplish something profound. It challenged a dark narrative that had been allowed to grow for 2 decades. It replaced the caricature of a suspect with the portrait of a survivor. A brother still grappling with a loss that the world has refused to let him mourn in peace. The question of who killed JonBenet Ramsey is still unanswered, but thanks to Burke's decision to speak, our understanding of the human cost of that question is now, finally, more complete.